A lonely widow helped a confused old man, never knowing he was her husband's long-lost brother. Martha Winters stood at the edge of the cemetery, her silhouette small against the vast expanse of granite markers and weeping angels. The November wind tore at her coat, the same black wool she'd worn to this spot every Wednesday for 3 years, since Robert's heart had stopped while he slept beside her. She placed fresh chrysanthemums on the grave, their amber and rust colors bright against the fading grass. 3 years today, she whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. And it still feels like yesterday. At 62, Martha had mastered the art of living alone. Her routines were carefully constructed fortresses against the silence of her Victorian home. Wednesday visits to Robert's grave, Thursday volunteering at the community garden, Friday afternoons at the library where she would select exactly 3 books to last the week. The cashiers at Greenfield Market knew her by name and her exact order. The mail carrier never had to ring her bell, knowing to leave packages on the covered portion of the porch. Her life was a perfectly orchestrated symphony of solitude. What Martha hadn't mastered was sleeping. Nights stretched before her like deserts, hours passing in the blue glow of her bedside clock, while memories of Robert played across the ceiling. Sometimes she could still feel the weight of his hand on her hip, the rumble of his laugh against her back. "Mrs. Winters?" The cemetery groundskeeper nodded respectfully as he passed. "Supposed to snow tonight. Don't stay too long." Martha acknowledged him with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Snow. Robert had loved the first snow of the season. He would wake her before dawn on those mornings, pull her to the bay window of their bedroom, and they would watch the world transform together, his arm warm around her shoulders. "I miss you," she said to the headstone. "Every day I miss you." When Martha finally turned to leave, the cemetery had emptied. Twilight was settling, casting long purple shadows across the paths. She pulled her coat tighter, feeling the cold press against her bones as she made her way toward the iron gates. That's when she saw him, an elderly man standing just inside the entrance, looking utterly lost. His coat was unbuttoned despite the cold, his white hair disheveled by the wind. He turned in a slow circle, confusion evident in every movement. Martha hesitated. Her car was parked just beyond the gate. She could easily walk past him, return to the safety of her routines. But something in his expression, a vulnerability that mirrored what she felt inside, made her pause. "Excuse me," she called, her voice rusty from disuse. "Are you looking for someone?" The man turned toward her voice, relief washing over his weathered face. He was older than she had first thought, perhaps in his mid-70s, with deep creases around kind blue eyes that seemed somehow familiar. "I'm not sure," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "I was supposed to meet my nephew here, but I can't seem to remember which section," he said. He patted the pockets of his coat. "I had it written down." Martha approached slowly. "The cemetery is quite large. Perhaps I can help you find your way. I've been coming here for years." She didn't add why. "That's very kind." He offered a tentative smile. "I'm Ellis Parker. Martha Winters," she replied, the social exchange feeling strange on her tongue after so many days of minimal human contact. "Do you remember anything about where you were supposed to meet?" Ellis's face clouded. It's not quite clear today." He tapped his temple with a gnarled finger. "Some days are better than others." The admission hung in the air between them. Martha recognized the shame that flickered across his face, the same expression she'd seen on Robert's face in those final months, when words would sometimes escape him mid-sentence. "The sun's almost down," Martha said gently. "And it's getting colder. Is there someone I could call for you?" Ellis patted his pockets again, more frantically this time. "My phone. I must have left it. Or maybe..." Confusion gave way to frustration, then to a quiet resignation that twisted something in Martha's chest. The first snowflakes began to fall, delicate specks against the darkening sky. Martha thought of her empty house, the leftover soup in the refrigerator, the book waiting on her nightstand, her carefully constructed evening slipping away. But she couldn't leave this man alone in the cold as night descended. "Mr. Parker, would you allow me to drive you somewhere? Perhaps to your home or to your nephew's house?" Relief softened his features. "If it wouldn't be too much trouble. I live at Willow Creek Apartments, but I'm not entirely sure I could direct you there tonight." Martha nodded. "Let's see if we can figure it out together." As they walked to her car, Martha maintained a respectful distance, yet stayed close enough to catch him if he stumbled on the uneven path. The snow was falling faster now, dusting their shoulders and hair with white. Ellis walked with slow, deliberate steps, occasionally glancing at Martha as if to reassure himself she was still there. "My late husband loved the first snow," Martha said, surprising herself by sharing this piece of Robert with a stranger. Ellis looked up at the sky, snowflakes landing on his weathered face. "There's something magical about it, isn't there? Like the world is starting over." The simple observation, so similar to what Robert might have said, made Martha's throat tighten. They reached her sensible blue sedan, and she helped Ellis navigate into the passenger seat before brushing snow from her coat and sliding behind the wheel. The interior of the car was cold, their breath creating small clouds as Martha started the engine and turned the heater to high. She pulled out her phone. "Let me see if I can find Willow Creek Apartments." A quick search revealed the complex across town, about a 15-minute drive. Martha set the navigation and pulled away from the curb, leaving the cemetery behind, its headstones now veiled in white. Ellis sat quietly beside her, his gaze fixed on the snow-dusted streets passing outside the window. Martha stole glances at his profile when stopped at traffic lights. There was a dignified gentleness about him that reminded her of Robert, though Ellis was taller and more angular where Robert had been stocky and solid. "Do you have family nearby, Mr. Parker?" Martha asked, breaking the silence. "Please call me Ellis," he said. "And yes, my nephew checks on me. He's been trying to convince me to move to that facility on Maple Street." Ellis's voice carried a hint of resistance. "I'm not ready for that yet, though some days make his argument stronger." Martha understood the unspoken fear. Robert had expressed the same concerns in his final year, the terror of losing independence, of becoming a burden. She had promised him it would never happen, that they would face whatever came together, a promise cut short by his unexpected death. "It's difficult," she said carefully, "finding the balance between independence and safety." Ellis nodded, his eyes still on the passing scenery. "My wife Clara, she passed 6 years ago. She was the organized one. Kept everything running smoothly." His voice softened with memory. "I never had to remember appointments or where I put things. She just knew." "I understand," Martha said quietly. "My husband Robert, he died 3 years ago today." Ellis turned to her then, his blue eyes filled with empathy. "I'm sorry. The anniversaries are the hardest." "They are," Martha agreed, surprised by how easily the words came with this stranger. "Does it get easier?" "After 6 years?" Ellis was quiet for a moment. "Not easier. Different. The pain changes shape. Some days it's a stone in your pocket, heavy but contained. Other days it's still as raw as the first moment." The honesty of his answer brought unexpected tears to Martha's eyes. She blinked them away, focusing on the road ahead where her headlights illuminated the falling snow. When they reached Willow Creek Apartments, Martha pulled into the visitor parking space. The complex was modest but well-maintained, with warm lights glowing from many windows. Ellis looked at the building with recognition, then uncertainty. "Building C," he said, then hesitated. "Let me help you find it," Martha offered, turning off the engine. Together they made their way through the snow, which was now coating the ground in a thin white blanket. Martha kept a watchful eye on Ellis, ready to steady him if needed. They found Building C, and Ellis led them to apartment 312, fishing a key from his coat pocket. The door swung open to reveal a small, neat apartment. Family photos lined the walls, and a plaid armchair sat angled toward a television set. A half-completed crossword puzzle lay on the coffee table beside a mug of what must have been long cold tea. "Home sweet home," Ellis said, relief evident in his voice. He turned to Martha, snowflakes melting on his shoulders. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Martha stood awkwardly in the doorway, suddenly aware that her good deed was complete. She should leave now, return to her empty house and her evening routine. Yet something made her linger. "Do you have someone coming to check on you tonight?" she asked. Given the weather, Ellis glanced at a calendar hanging beside the refrigerator, squinting to make out the writing. "I don't believe so. Not until tomorrow." Martha thought of him alone in the apartment, possibly confused again, with the snow continuing to fall outside. She thought of her own empty home waiting across town, of the anniversary that would continue to weigh on her whether she was there or somewhere else. "Would you allow me to make you some dinner before I go?" she heard herself asking. "I'd feel better knowing you had a hot meal." Surprise, then genuine pleasure, transformed Ellis's face. "I would like that very much. It's been a while since I've had company for dinner." Martha hung her coat by the door and followed Ellis into the small kitchen. The refrigerator contained basic essentials: eggs, milk, some vegetables that had seen better days. The freezer yielded a package of chicken breasts. "I can make a simple chicken soup," Martha offered. "My mother's recipe. It's perfect for a snowy evening." Ellis sat at the kitchen table, watching as Martha moved around his kitchen with growing confidence. There was comfort in the familiar actions: chopping vegetables, seasoning broth, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board. Martha realized she hadn't cooked a proper meal for anyone but herself in months. "Do you cook much?" she asked Ellis as the soup began to simmer, filling the apartment with a homey aroma. "Not anymore," he admitted. "Clara was the cook in our family. After she passed, I never got the hang of it beyond the basics." He gestured to a stack of frozen meal containers in the trash. "My nephew brings those each week." Martha stirred the soup, adding a pinch more salt. "My husband tried to cook exactly once in our 40 years together. He made spaghetti that was somehow both burnt and undercooked. We ended up ordering pizza." Ellis laughed, a warm, genuine sound that brightened his entire face. "Clara once used salt instead of sugar in a batch of cookies for a church bake sale." The pastor was too polite to say anything, just kept smiling as he chewed and chewed. Martha found herself laughing too, the sound strange to her own ears after so much silence. As the soup simmered, they exchanged more stories, small, ordinary moments of their lives with their spouses. For the first time in 3 years, Martha spoke of Robert without feeling the crushing weight of loss. Instead, there was a bittersweet warmth in sharing his memory with someone who understood. When the soup was ready, Martha ladled it into bowls she found in the upper cabinet. They ate at the small kitchen table, snow continuing to fall outside the window, casting the room in a soft, muffled quiet. "This is delicious," Ellis said after his first spoonful. "Just like my mother used to make." "Thank you," Martha replied, warmth spreading through her chest at the simple compliment. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the occasional clink of spoons against bowls and the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. "May I ask you something, Martha?" Ellis said finally, setting down his spoon. "Of course. Why did you stop to help me today?" Most people would have walked past an old man looking confused. Martha considered the question, stirring her soup thoughtfully. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "Something in your expression, perhaps. Or maybe..." She hesitated. "Maybe after 3 years of being alone, I recognized the feeling in someone else." Ellis nodded slowly. "Loneliness has a certain look to it, doesn't it? Like wearing clothes that don't quite fit." "That's a good way to put it," Martha said softly. After dinner, Martha washed the dishes despite Ellis's protests, and he dried them with a faded dishcloth. The simple domestic task felt soothing after years of eating alone, clearing away single settings. Outside, the snow continued to fall, heavier now. Martha glanced at her watch, surprised to find it was nearly 9 o'clock. "I should be going. The roads will only get worse." Ellis walked her to the door, where she buttoned her coat against the cold that awaited. "Thank you again, Martha, for everything." "It was my pleasure," she said, and meant it. For the first time in years, the evening of Robert's death anniversary hadn't been spent in hollow solitude. Ellis hesitated, then asked, "Would you consider... that is, would you like to have coffee sometime? Perhaps at that cafe on Main Street? I could meet you there. When it's not snowing, of course." The invitation caught Martha off guard. Her first instinct was to politely decline, to retreat back to the safety of her routines. But something about this gentle man with the familiar blue eyes made her pause. "I'd like that," she said. "I volunteer at the community garden on Thursday mornings. Perhaps afterward? Around 11? Ellis's face brightened. "Thursday at 11. I'll be there." Martha wrote down her phone number on a notepad by the door, "in case you need to reach me." As she drove home through the snow-covered streets, Martha felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, a small flutter of anticipation. Not happiness exactly, but a tentative step toward something new. The weight of the anniversary still sat heavy in her chest, but alongside it was something else, something lighter. When she arrived home, her house felt different somehow. Still empty, still quiet, but less oppressive. She went through her bedtime routine, washing her face, brushing her teeth, laying out clothes for tomorrow. But when she climbed into bed, instead of staring at the ceiling counting the hours, Martha found herself thinking of Ellis's kind blue eyes and the way his face had lit up when she'd agreed to coffee. For the first time in 3 years, she fell asleep before midnight on the anniversary of Robert's death. Thursday morning dawned clear and cold, the world transformed by the previous night's snow. Martha went through her garden volunteering with unusual attention to the clock. At 11:15, she found herself standing outside the Daily Grind Cafe, nervously smoothing her coat. Would Ellis remember? Had his confusion from Tuesday been a temporary episode, or would he have forgotten their coffee plans entirely? Martha almost convinced herself to leave, to avoid the disappointment, when she spotted him walking down the street toward her. Ellis wore a blue scarf that matched his eyes and a brown wool coat, neatly buttoned. His white hair was combed, and he carried himself with more confidence than he had at the cemetery. When he saw Martha, his face broke into a wide smile that created a constellation of wrinkles around his eyes. "You came?" he said, sounding pleasantly surprised. "So did you," Martha replied, her own smile coming more easily than expected. Inside, they found a small table by the window where sunlight streamed in, making prisms in their water glasses. Ellis ordered black coffee. Martha chose Earl Grey tea. There was a moment of awkwardness as they settled in, the spontaneous connection from Tuesday evening suddenly requiring more deliberate navigation. "I brought something to show you," Ellis said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small photo album, its cover worn from handling. "After you left, I was thinking about what you said, about your husband passing 3 years ago." He opened the album to a specific page and slid it across the table. "This was Clara and me on our 40th anniversary, our last one before she got sick." Martha looked down at the photograph of Ellis and a silver-haired woman with a bright smile, standing arm in arm in what appeared to be a garden. They were looking at each other rather than the camera, caught in a moment of private joy. "She was beautiful," Martha said, noting the obvious devotion in their expressions. "She was," Ellis agreed, his voice soft with memory. "The smartest person I've ever known. Taught high school mathematics for 35 years. Martha reached into her purse and withdrew her own wallet, removing a carefully preserved photograph. "This was Robert, taken about 5 years ago at our daughter's wedding." Ellis studied the photo of a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair and a jovial expression, standing proudly in a gray suit. "He looks like he was a good man," Ellis said. "The best?" Martha replied. "A high school history teacher. The students loved him. At his funeral, so many former students came, some from decades earlier. 'A teacher affects eternity,'" Ellis quoted softly. "He can never tell where his influence stops." "Henry Adams." Martha identified the quote with surprise. "Robert used to say that exact thing." Ellis smiled. "Great minds think alike. I was a literature professor before I retired. Though these days," he tapped his temple again, "the quotes sometimes come without the attributions." Their conversation flowed easily after that. They discovered shared interests in classical music and gardening. Both had traveled through Europe in their younger days. Ellis had one daughter living in Australia. Martha's lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 children. "Do you see them often?" Ellis asked. "Not as much as I'd like," Martha admitted. "They visited last Christmas, and I flew out in August for my grandson's birthday. They've been asking me to move closer, but this is home," Ellis finished for her. "Yes, though sometimes I wonder if I'm just clinging to a life that doesn't exist anymore." Ellis nodded thoughtfully. "Clara and I moved 7 times during our marriage, following teaching positions mostly. She always said home wasn't about the walls, but about where you felt most yourself." "And where is that for you now?" Martha asked. Ellis considered the question, turning his coffee cup slowly between his palms. "I'm not sure anymore. That's the truth of it. Some days I don't feel quite myself anywhere." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Martha reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture of understanding rather than pity. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we can help each other remember." As they left the cafe 2 hours later, plans made to meet again on Sunday for a walk if weather permitted, Martha felt a lightness in her step that had been absent for years. There was something freeing about starting fresh with someone who carried similar scars, who understood the geography of loss without requiring maps and explanations. Over the next several weeks, Martha and Ellis fell into a comfortable rhythm of shared moments. Sunday walks through Riverside Park when the weather allowed. Tuesday lunches at Martha's favorite diner. Sometimes they would simply sit in Ellis's apartment, Martha reading while Ellis worked on crossword puzzles, comfortable in shared silence. Martha began bringing home-cooked meals to stock Ellis's freezer, labeled with heating instructions in clear, bold print. Ellis introduced Martha to his favorite poetry, reading aloud in his rich professor's voice while they sat in her living room, the fireplace crackling against December's chill. They spoke often of their late spouses, sharing stories that made them laugh and sometimes cry. Martha found that speaking of Robert became easier with each telling, the memories less painful when aired in the sunlight of Ellis's understanding. There were difficult days, too. Times when Ellis would grow confused, forgetting appointments or repeating the same story multiple times. Days when the simplest tasks seemed to overwhelm him. Martha learned to recognize the signs, a certain cloudiness in his eyes, a hesitation in his speech, and adjusted accordingly, offering gentle reminders without drawing attention to his lapses. Ellis's nephew, Michael, was initially suspicious of Martha's presence in his uncle's life, watching her with careful eyes when they first met at Ellis's apartment. But as weeks passed and he saw the positive changes in his uncle, Ellis more engaged, better groomed, more organized, his wariness softened into gratitude. "He's been different since he met you," Michael told Martha one evening as they washed dishes while Ellis napped in his armchair. "More present, more himself. He's been good for me too," Martha admitted. "I was just going through the motions before." December melted into January. Martha invited Ellis to her home for Christmas dinner, along with her daughter's family who were visiting from Seattle. Ellis charmed Martha's grandchildren with magic tricks and stories, his occasional memory lapses covered smoothly by Martha's gentle redirections. By the end of the evening, her 7-year-old grandson was sitting on Ellis's lap, teaching him how to play a game on his tablet. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Martha and Ellis sat beside the Christmas tree, its lights casting colored shadows across the living room. "Thank you for including me," Ellis said softly. "This is the first Christmas since Clara passed that hasn't felt hollow." Martha nodded, understanding completely. "Having you here has made it feel like a real Christmas again." Ellis reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "I've been meaning to tell you something, Martha. Something important." Martha turned to face him, noting the serious set of his mouth. "My doctor thinks my memory issues are progressing," he said quietly. "The confusion, the forgetfulness, it's not just age. They're running tests, but they're fairly certain it's early-stage Alzheimer's." The words landed heavily in the festive room. Martha tightened her grip on his hand, her mind racing to process what this might mean. "How long have you known?" she asked. "I've suspected for about a year. The official diagnosis came the day before I met you, actually." Ellis's smile was sad. "I was at the cemetery that day because I'd gone to talk to Clara about it." "Sounds silly, I know." "It doesn't sound silly at all," Martha said, thinking of all her one-sided conversations with Robert over the years. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want that to define whatever this is between us." Ellis gestured between them. "And I was afraid you might not want to take on someone who's going to become a burden." Martha felt a surge of emotion, sorrow for what Ellis was facing, anger that he might think she would abandon him, and underneath it all, a fierce protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. "Ellis Parker," she said firmly, taking both his hands in hers. "You listen to me. I spent 40 years with a man I loved more than life itself. I watched him struggle with his health in his final years. Not once, not for a single moment, did I consider him a burden." Ellis's eyes glistened in the Christmas lights. "This will be different, Martha. Harder. I've seen what this disease does. I won't always be me. Then I'll remember for both of us," Martha said simply. "For as long as it takes. That's what friends do." Ellis brought her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. "Friends," he repeated, the word carrying a weight of gratitude and something more that neither was quite ready to name. As winter gave way to spring, Martha and Ellis's relationship deepened. They established routines that accommodated Ellis's good and bad days. Martha began accompanying him to doctor's appointments, taking careful notes and asking questions Ellis sometimes couldn't formulate. She downloaded memory apps on his phone and set up reminders for medications and appointments. Ellis, for his part, brought joy and purpose back into Martha's life. His literature professor's knowledge introduced her to books she'd never explored. His dry wit made her laugh more in 6 months than she had in the previous 3 years combined. On his good days, they would take day trips to nearby towns, exploring antique shops and historical sites, Ellis's knowledge of local history bringing the past to life. It was during one such trip in early April that their relationship shifted. They had visited a small maritime museum in a coastal town an hour's drive from home. Ellis was having a particularly good day, his mind sharp and clear as he explained the significance of various nautical instruments to Martha. Afterward, they walked along the harbor, watching sailboats glide across the water, their white sails bright against the blue sky. Ellis stopped suddenly, gazing out at the horizon. "I've been thinking about something Clara used to say," he said, "about how when you've loved deeply once, your heart doesn't run out of room. It just expands." Martha stood beside him, watching a seagull circle overhead. Robert said something similar, that love isn't a finite resource. Ellis turned to her then, his blue eyes clear and certain. "Martha, I'm falling in love with you. I need you to know that before there are more days when I might not remember how to say it properly." The declaration hung in the salt-tinged air between them. Martha felt her heart quicken, a mix of joy and fear washing over her. Joy at hearing words she'd realized she'd been longing for, fear of what loving someone with an uncertain future might mean. "You don't have to say anything," Ellis continued when she remained silent. "I just wanted to tell you while I'm fully myself, fully present. Whatever happens next is—" Martha stepped forward and kissed him, cutting off his words. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening with decades of loneliness and newfound hope. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. "I love you too," Martha said simply. "I think I have for months." They held each other as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long golden light across the harbor. Nothing and everything had changed. Whatever lay ahead, good days, difficult days, moments of clarity and moments of confusion, they would face together. Summer arrived with warm breezes and abundant sunshine. Martha's garden flourished under her renewed attention, and Ellis would sit in a wicker chair reading poetry aloud while she tended to her flowers. His memory continued to have good and bad days, but the medication seemed to stabilize the progression temporarily, giving them precious time. It was on a particularly beautiful July afternoon, as they sat in Martha's garden enjoying iced tea, that Ellis broached a subject they'd been dancing around. "I've been thinking about the future," he said, setting down his glass. "Specifically about living arrangements." Martha nodded, having had the same thoughts herself. Ellis's apartment, while comfortable, wasn't ideal for someone with advancing memory issues. There were too many opportunities for confusion: the stove, the medications, the occasionally complicated door locks. "I've spoken with Michael," Ellis continued. "He still thinks I should consider Maple Grove assisted living." Martha felt a twinge of sadness at the thought of Ellis in an institution, even one as well regarded as Maple Grove. "What do you think?" she asked carefully. Ellis looked around the garden, at the riot of colors from Martha's flowers, the comfortable seating area she'd created, the bird feeders that attracted cardinals and finches. "I think I'd rather be here." "With you?" He met her eyes directly. "If that's something you might consider?" Martha reached for his hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "I've been thinking the same thing. This house is too big for just me. It has a bedroom on the main floor that would be perfect for when stairs become difficult. And I'd like having you here." Relief washed over Ellis's face. "Are you certain?" "It's a big commitment, Martha. There will be challenges ahead." "I've never been more certain of anything," Martha said firmly. "We'll take it one day at a time, together." The decision made, they began the process of moving Ellis into Martha's home. Michael helped transport Ellis's belongings, and Martha cleared space in closets and drawers. They transformed the downstairs study into a bedroom that Ellis could use when navigating stairs became too difficult, though for now he would share Martha's upstairs bedroom. The transition wasn't without complications. Ellis sometimes grew confused in the new environment, occasionally wandering the house at night looking for his old apartment. Martha installed gentle nightlights in hallways and bathrooms, and gradually, Ellis began to recognize the house as home. They settled into a new rhythm together. Mornings spent reading the newspaper over coffee, afternoons in the garden or taking short walks around the neighborhood, evenings watching old movies or listening to classical music. Martha learned to recognize the signs when Ellis was becoming overwhelmed and would gently guide him to quieter activities. Michael visited regularly, bringing his children who delighted in Ellis's stories and magic tricks. Martha's daughter and grandchildren called weekly on video chat, her grandson always eager to show Ellis his latest school projects or video games. In September, Martha organized a small gathering to celebrate Ellis's 76th birthday. Michael and his family came, as did several of Ellis's former colleagues from the university and a few of Martha's friends from the garden club and library. It was the first time Martha had entertained a large group since Robert's death, and the house felt alive with conversation and laughter. As Martha carried a cake adorned with candles into the dining room, everyone began to sing. Ellis's face lit up with joy as he looked around at the circle of friends and family. When the singing ended, he closed his eyes for a moment before blowing out the candles in one breath. "What did you wish for, Uncle Ellis?" Michael's daughter asked. Ellis's eyes found Martha's across the room. "I already have everything I could wish for," he said simply. Later that night, after all the guests had gone and the house was quiet once more, Ellis and Martha sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the garden. Ellis held a small wrapped package in his hands. "I have something for you," he said, presenting it to Martha. Michael helped me pick it out. Martha unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of the two of them that Michael had taken during a picnic in June. "It's beautiful," Martha whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I wanted you to have something to remember this time," Ellis said softly. "While I'm still me, while I still remember how much I love you." Martha closed the locket and handed it to Ellis, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. "I'll never take it off," she promised, touching the silver pendant as it rested against her skin. Ellis kissed her gently. "There's something else I've been wanting to show you. Something I found when we were packing up my apartment." He went inside and returned with a worn leather photo album Martha hadn't seen before. "I'd forgotten I had this," he explained. "It was in a box in the back of my closet." They sat side by side on the swing as Ellis opened the album. The first pages contained black and white photographs of a young couple Martha didn't recognize. "My parents," Ellis explained. "And these are photos from my childhood." Martha leaned closer, fascinated by these glimpses into Ellis's past. He pointed out various relatives and childhood friends, telling stories about each when his memory allowed. As they turned the pages, the photos became more recent. Ellis as a young man in a university setting, his wedding to Clara, their daughter as a baby and young child. Then Ellis turned to a section near the end of the album and hesitated. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said, his voice suddenly serious. The page contained several photos of two young men, one she recognized as a much younger Ellis, the other a stranger with similar features, though stockier and with darker hair. The young men were fishing together, standing outside what appeared to be a college dormitory, arms slung around each other's shoulders. "That's my brother James," Ellis said, tapping the photo. "We were very close growing up, only a year apart." Martha studied the photos with interest. Ellis had mentioned a brother before, but had never shown pictures or spoken about him at length. Something about the other young man seemed vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place why. "What happened to him?" she asked. Ellis's face grew somber. "We had a falling out. A terrible argument when we were in our 20s. Over something so trivial I can barely remember it now. A girl we both liked, I think. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. We both had too much pride to apologize." He sighed deeply. "We didn't speak for decades. By the time I was ready to reach out to try to make amends, I couldn't find him. He'd moved away, changed his phone number." Martha squeezed his hand supportively. "I'm so sorry, Ellis." Ellis turned another page, revealing more recent photos. A middle-aged man who still resembled the younger James, though with graying hair and a more solid build. "I hired a private investigator about 15 years ago trying to locate him. All they could find were these few photos from a company newsletter. By then, he'd changed his name. He was going by Robert Parker instead of James Parker." Martha's heart skipped a beat. She leaned closer to the photograph, a strange buzzing beginning in her ears. The man in the photo, older but still recognizable, was her Robert, her husband. "Ellis," she whispered, her voice barely audible. That's my Robert." Ellis looked at her in confusion, then back at the photograph. "What do you mean?" With trembling hands, Martha reached for her purse and withdrew her wallet. She pulled out the photograph of Robert she always carried and placed it next to the one in Ellis's album. There was no denying the truth that stared back at them. The same eyes, the same smile, the same small scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood accident. "My husband's name was Robert Winters," Martha said, her voice shaking. "But before we met, before we married, he told me he'd changed his name. He never spoke much about his family, only that there had been a falling out, that bridges had been burned. Ellis stared at the photographs, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "It can't be," he whispered. "All these years, all this time?" Martha felt the world tilting beneath her, past and present colliding in a way that seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. "You're my husband's brother," she said, the words strange on her tongue. "You're Robert's brother." Ellis reached out with a trembling hand and touched the photograph of Robert. "James," he said softly, using the name he had known his brother by. "My little brother." They sat in stunned silence as the implications washed over them. All these months they had been sharing stories of their lives, never realizing the invisible thread that had connected them all along. Martha had been married to Ellis's estranged brother for 40 years. Ellis was her children's uncle, her grandchildren's great-uncle. "Did he ever speak of me?" Ellis finally asked, his voice small and vulnerable. Martha searched her memories, trying to recall any mention of a brother named Ellis. He spoke of a brother sometimes, but never by name. Just that they had been close once and then had a falling out. He would get this look in his eyes, sad, regretful. Especially around the holidays. Ellis closed the photo album, his hands shaking slightly. "I tried to find him to make amends. After Clara got sick, I realized how precious family is, how pointless old grudges become in the face of mortality." His voice broke. "I was too late." Martha took his hand in hers. "No," she said firmly. "You weren't too late. You found me instead. And through me, you found him again. We found each other exactly when we needed to." Ellis looked at her, his blue eyes, so similar to Robert's, swimming with tears. "Do you think he would have forgiven me? If we had found each other in time?" "I know he would have," Martha said without hesitation. In his final years, Robert spoke often about regrets, about wishing he could mend fences with his family. "He never named you specifically, but I know he was referring to you." Ellis nodded slowly, absorbing this. "And now? Where does this leave us, Martha? This changes everything." Martha considered the question, her hand unconsciously rising to touch the locket around her neck. The revelation was shocking, disorienting, but as she looked at Ellis, at the man she had come to love, she realized that the fundamental truth of their connection remained unchanged. "It changes the past," she said carefully. "It explains why we felt a connection from the beginning, why certain things about you seemed familiar. But it doesn't change how I feel about you now, Ellis. You're still the man who brought me back to life after years of loneliness. The man I've fallen in love with." Ellis searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he pulled her gently into his arms, holding her as the porch swing rocked slowly beneath them. "Of all the cemeteries in all the towns in all the world," he murmured against her hair, "you walked into mine." Martha laughed softly through her tears at his Casablanca reference. "Perhaps it wasn't coincidence," she said. "Perhaps Robert had a hand in bringing us together." They stayed on the porch swing until the fireflies faded and the moon rose high in the sky, talking about Robert, about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together, about what this revelation meant for their future. The next morning, Martha called her daughter in Seattle to share the incredible discovery. There were tears, questions, disbelief, and finally, a sense of wonder at how the universe had conspired to bring family back together in such an unexpected way. In the weeks that followed, Martha and Ellis pored over old photographs, discovering similarities they had missed before. Ellis's memories of his childhood with James, with Robert, filled in blanks that Martha had never been able to complete. Stories of their parents, their hometown, adventures and misadventures of their youth. Michael was equally astonished by the revelation, immediately embracing Martha as family. "Dad would have loved this," he told Ellis, knowing his brother was happy that his wife was being taken care of. As autumn painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson, Martha and Ellis traveled to Seattle to visit her daughter and grandchildren. Ellis's memory had good days and bad during the trip, but Martha was always there to fill in the gaps, to gently remind him of names and relationships. Her grandchildren took to their newfound great-uncle immediately, fascinated by this unexpected addition to their family tree. On their final evening in Seattle, Martha's daughter presented them with a gift, a newly assembled family photo album that integrated pictures of both families, connecting the separate branches into one cohesive story. To new beginnings, her daughter toasted at dinner that night, and to the remarkable ways that love finds its way back to us. Back home, as winter approached once more, Martha and Ellis settled into their life together with a deeper understanding of the forces that had brought them together. Ellis's condition continued to progress, some days better than others, but the overall trajectory unmistakable. There were moments of frustration, of fear, of grief for what was being lost, but there were beautiful moments too. Mornings when Ellis would recall perfect details of his childhood with Robert. Evenings when they would sit by the fire, Ellis reading poetry from memory, his professor's voice strong and clear. Quiet afternoons in the garden, watching birds at the feeders, their hands intertwined. One snowy evening in December, almost exactly a year after they had met, Ellis and Martha stood in the cemetery together, placing wreaths on Robert's grave. Ellis traced his brother's name on the headstone, his fingers lingering on the carved letters. "I found you, little brother," he said softly. "Better late than never." Martha slipped her arm through Ellis's, leaning her head against his shoulder. "He knows," she said simply. As they turned to leave, snow beginning to fall around them, Ellis paused and looked back at the grave one last time. "Thank you," he whispered. Martha wasn't sure if he was speaking to Robert or to some larger force that had orchestrated their meeting, perhaps both. But as they walked carefully through the snow toward their car, toward home, she felt a sense of completion, of circles closing and new ones beginning. A lonely widow had helped a confused old man, never knowing he was her husband's long-lost brother. And in doing so, she had found a new chapter in her own story, one filled with love, with purpose, with the beautiful complexity of second chances. As they drove home through the gently falling snow, Martha glanced at Ellis, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights. Tomorrow might bring confusion, might steal more of his memories. But today, in this moment, they were fully present with each other, and that was enough, more than enough.